Hello and welcome to the Iron Maiden. My name is Abby and today I'm going to show you the three current types of Vynnset builds. In my opinion, there's two builds that have been here since the start of Vynnset or early on, and the third build which is fairly new but is proving itself quite well in the competitive scene. Of these three we have Redline, Binstant and Mordred, I'm calling them. So the Redline decks focus on good numbers in the aggressive sense. So they have more 0 for 4 attacks, they have pretty good numbers turn by turn, but they lose setup potential, where they don't have as many ways to set up big turns, which means that they're a little bit of a struggle into fatigue. The Binstant deck focuses on the Eloquence cards, so by that I mean Funeral Moon, Requiem of the Damned, and Cull, which can each be played as an instant as long as someone has lost life. This is a good trick and it adds a lot of blood deck cards to your deck, which also ups consistency. These decks also run more 3 blocks generally because of the 3 block Binstants, but these cards are often worth 1, maybe 2 value, unless they're used in a combo sense, so they have fairly low value in medium turns or in more aggressive games. And then the third type is the newer type, which is Mordred. So this deck really focuses on setting up auras and especially setting up Malefic Incantation. So Sonata Galaxia there is a good example of a card that lets you get your Malefics quicker. Once you have several Malefics, they look to play a Mordred Tide and then go 3 or 4 rune gates long, so they get double value out of the Malefics and they get double value out of the Deathly Whales. So this means it has much better time into fatigue decks. It's good against decks where you need to set up, but I think it loses consistency into aggro. They do share many cards. Each of these deck types are really more like packages. I think this is really how Flesh and Blood is in a lot of cases. Your Guardian deck that is focused on attacking, and your Guardian deck that is focused on maybe a little bit more blocking, is going to have the same 60 cards and only 20 different, right? So in the same way here, we have almost exactly the same rune gates in every attack, in every deck, because there's only so many good ones. There's about 23 or 4 that are always the same, and then there's a few extra depending on how many they want to play. The rune chant generation is almost always exactly the same, because Malefic and Dirge and some of those cards are just too powerful to not include. And of course, they all play Go Again cards. Shadow Puppetry is in all of them, Machinations is in most of them, but they all need access to giving cards Go Again. The big difference between these three types of deck is how they use the shared cards. So Malefic is an excellent example of this. In the Redline deck, it wants to attack every turn, so really the Malefic adds 1 damage and sometimes adds consistency. In the Binstant deck, it's probably going to do a little bit more setting up, so the Malefics can be used for double rune gating. Whereas in the Mordred deck, your Malefics are super important to your strategy, and you're going to play them and not attack often, because you want to set up a few of them so that the Mordred gets maximum value. Here's an example of a Redline deck list from Vynnset, who's a pretty well-known Flesh and Blood creator. So this deck list has, you can see, a few 0 for 4s in Bounding Demagon and Swarming Gloomveil. It also has lots of non-attacks that are red. So for example, Beseech the Demagon, which always gets value. Tear Through the Portal, which pretty much always gets value in this deck. They've also cut almost every card that isn't red. So there's 3 yellow whales, and there's 3 yellow Malefics, and a few yellows in the sideboard. But really, the deck needs to play as many reds as it can to add to consistency, both for cards like Ravenous Rabble in the sideboard, but also so that it can just do its game plan of never ever pitching. Then the Binstant type deck list, you can see they have still their Funeral Moons and their Culls, which are somewhat shared between these two decks, but also Requiem of the Damned, which is really showing what this deck list wants to do a little bit more setup. I have none of the 0 for 4s, one Bounding Demagon is all, but they replace those with 0 for 4 D-Reacts. So this deck is a little bit more defensive, wants to set up a little bit, and then pop off on a big turn. Not overly long like the Mordred Tide deck though. They also get access to blue cards and yellow cards. So for example, they can play Oblivion, which can be really important to beat fatigue decks, but the Redline deck can't really play it and keep its strategy. And then of course the Mordred deck. This deck list comes straight from the US Nationals from Jeffrey Mazar, who did very well with it. So of course you can see the Mordreds, he's still got all the Malefics, so that's normal for all these deck lists. The 3 Sonata to go get them. The real big differences are Time Snap Potion for maximum setup, Tear Through the Portal being a little bit more prevalent because it's really good with your Mordred turns and your Deathly Whales. So this deck list, of course, sets up a lot heavier and then tries to go off in a big turn. You may notice that this deck list doesn't have a sideboard, and that's because it was grabbed from the Flesh and Blood main page, and they don't have sideboards in their deck lists. They just have all the cards, same as when you join the tournament and make your deck list. So now let's do some comparisons between some of these. If we look at Redline and Binstants, the Redline deck has a few more 0-cost cards, but has no 4-cost cards and less 1 and just less 1 cost. That's the same amount of 2 costs. So what we can see here is that the Binstant deck is a little bit more willing to pitch for the 1 costs, whereas the Redline deck wants to never ever pitch. We can also see, of course, the red number 59 in the Redline deck is huge, whereas in the Binstant deck it's about 48, maybe 49, so significantly lower. The blue number there is about 11, and the yellows are about the same. So basically every card in this deck list, in the Binstant deck list that's blue, would be replaced by a red card. That's how significant it is. You can also see that they have slightly more attacks in the Redline type and slightly more non-attacks in the Binstant type, as well as D-Reacts and things like that. And then, of course, if you look at the power number, they have more power in Redline because they have more attacks. But the Binstant deck has significantly more blood debt. Well, 4 more is pretty significant in these numbers. So they get to banish a little bit more consistently, but they both share a defense value. So that means they both block about the same. If you look at a comparison between the two deck lists, you can see, of course, there's more attacks in Redline, better sideboard options, or maybe more free sideboard options in the Binstant, but they have similar numbers of 3 blocks. Alright, then we can look at the Mordred and Binstant comparison. So in this case, the Mordred deck has about 35, and the Binstant deck has about, that would be 33, and the Binstant deck has 36, 0 costs. So the Mordred is even more willing to pitch, probably, than the Binstant deck. The Binstant deck has more 1 cost still, so you can tell that they're probably going to be playing Tunic more often, whereas the Mordred deck gets a few more 2 costs, just a few more 2 costs and 1 more 4 cost. The Mordred deck plays the same number of reds, yellows, and blues, basically. A few little numbers are different there. They have about the same number of actions. They have really similar attack, non-attack split here. So the difference is, of course, I'll show you here, that there's more blood debt in the Binstant deck because their non-attacks are the play from Banished Binstants, whereas the Mordred deck plays Mordred Tide and things and Sonata like that, so they will have less blood debt, which you can see here is very significant. There's 27 blood debt in Mordred and 36 blood debt in Binstant, which is a point a 9-point difference, which is huge. Alright, and then let's look at the difference in matchups, basically. So I think that the Redline deck probably has a better matchup into Gravy and Syndra as examples, which means that basically it's good when your opponent can't or won't block. So into allies or other Redline decks, I think Redline is pretty strong. It gets the most value per turn probably, but we'll see the negative matchups in a second. The Binstant type deck is really quite flexible because it has more blood debt and the Binstants can be played in lots of different ways. So it makes them pretty good against disruptive decks. And because it's also really good at blocking, it makes it pretty good against on-hit based decks. So that's something like ninjas and assassins. The Mordred style deck is really good against fatigue compared to the other ones. So when your opponent will give you a little bit of time to set up, it's going to be good. So that can include Florian and Guardians and things like that. Where they lose out on power in their matchups is the Redline deck has struggled against Disruption. I think its hands are maybe a little bit more fragile in a lot of cases, and they have really struggle into the fatigue decks, like I said before. The Binstant deck, I think, struggles to block Arcane. The Redline deck, of course, struggles as well to block Arcane, but they can kill really quickly. Whereas the Binstant deck plays these 3 blocks because it likes to block, but it loses the ability to against some of these Arcane decks. And, of course, it struggles to pay extra because it wants to play these 0-cost Binstants to get more value, and it might find it hard to play out their turns properly if they have to pay 1 more, which is common of most Vynnset games, but I think it's more prominent here. Also, the Mordred deck, I think, has a negative matchups into decks that kill you. So that can be things like Dio, which is going to run you over with massive damage, or Azalea, which is going to restrict your ability to block and stop you from arsenaling key cards. So this is only my opinion. I don't really play Redline or Mordred, but from what I see and what I think, the positive matchups, they have their benefits, of course, but they also have their negatives as well. That's going to be the end of that video today. I will be putting out a deck list very soon, hopefully in the next few days, that will show you my Nationals planning. I will give you a hint now and tell you I don't like Mordred and I don't like Redline, and my deck is probably more similar to the Binstant style. So if you like that idea, stick around and subscribe. Also, you can join the Discord in the description below, where I'll always be talking about my deck list, discussing deck lists with other Vynnset players. I also have 2 comics on the left there if you'd like to check them out, and there should be another video on your screen if you liked what you saw. Have a good day, and be good.